Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining today to this webinar on creative approaches to science communication. Let's wait a few more seconds to give people some time to join the webinar, and then I will introduce to you our speakers of today. I think, Melissa, you're already with us.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, how are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good as well. Yeah, thank you. Let's see if Holly has joined us already. Okay. So are you excited for the workshop today, Melissa?
I am. Yeah, I was just going through some of my bit of the story that I'm going to tell in the beginning. So, very excited.
That's great. I see Holly is here as well. Hi, Holly. How are you doing?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
Good as well, yeah. How are you?
You
Okay,
know
so
what? On a gloomy day, it's feeling pretty good so far.
Great. So to our audience, welcome today to the 27th episode of the Early Career Ocean Professionals webinar series. So today we have a webinar on creative approaches to science communication with Holly and Melissa. If you would already like to introduce yourself in the chat, feel free to pop a message, who you are, where you're from. And yeah, I will also launch a poll already to get to know our audience a bit better.
sounds good. Thank you guys for joining. Kind of getting the feel for who's in the room. So that's what this poll is about. Where are you guys from? And what's your area of expertise?
Yeah, great. Melissa, would you like to get ready with your slides?
Yes.
We can still wait a bit more, but
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and get everybody seeing this. Welcome to the Creative Science Communication Workshop. So my name is Melissa Pappas. Holly Virish is going to be helping me facilitate this as well. We both went to college together. We both did marine biology together. So it's actually really exciting to be on a call together. Um, and this is a workshop that I put together through a community and agency that I started and founded called Emerging Creatives of Science. So I encourage you all to take a look at that after we're done. And I feel like I'm just going to jump in because I've got a little bit of story to tell. So for people that are going to enter the room a few minutes late, I think they can kind of follow along as we go.
that sounds great.
All right. So let's make sure this is all working.
Just maybe a last reminder to people joining the webinar, make sure your microphone is muted.
Yeah, there's going to be a moment for interaction too. So at some point, we'll be getting off mute, putting our videos on, and talking to each other in the room. But I think, the first thing I like to do is get started by talking about who I am and how did I get here. I think it's probably good context for why you should even be listening to me talk about this topic. So I grew up in a landlocked state, Arizona, which is in the southwest part of the US. It's a desert state, no ocean anywhere nearby. It's just like a 6-hour drive to the closest ocean. So when I said that I wanted to be a marine biologist, people thought I was crazy. That was not something that people in my high school would have ever considered as a real career. And they're also questioning, like, well, why do you want to study marine biology when we don't even live near an ocean? Okay, so I've got a lot of critics up front about, why would I want to go into this profession? Why would this be the major? But what happened was every summer my family would take us to California, and in those moments of tide pooling where I got to explore like the little microcosms of the ocean environment and pick up sea stars and touch the little sticky anemone tentacles and really feel like I was transported to a completely different world. Like that's where the passion and enthusiasm and like great motivation for wanting to study these ecosystems was born. So fast forward into college, I got to go to Eckerd College in St. Petersburg, Florida, and this is also where I met Holly. Um, this is the first time in my life that I actually heard the phrase climate change and heard it explained in a way that was supported by science. So I'm sure many of you on the call, maybe early on in your career, if you did study marine science or had any interest in the ocean, that phrase climate change really didn't exist in the early 2000s. The thing that was the closest, I think, was something one of my teachers in high school called global weirding. And even when we talked about it in class, which was very, very infrequent, it seemed like a taboo subject. You know, people weren't really talking about the ocean, environmental issues, sustainability. I mean, some of these buzzwords that we now are so familiar with today just weren't a thing. They weren't part of the vocabulary, they weren't part of the culture, and they definitely weren't part of the education that I was receiving. So finally, when I got to Florida, studied marine science, I realized that, oh, yeah, the career that I wanted to get into is not just something that would be cool to study because I love ocean critters. It's actually like very much a career that we need right now. I was trying to explain all this to my parents, who at the time were really just like supporting my dreams and basically being like, oh, she loves the ocean. She loves dolphins. Let her go out and study that in Florida. And we support that. And she'll tell us about her scuba diving adventures. But the idea of it being like a meaningful and valuable career was still maybe a little doubtful in their minds. But what do you do when you're really good at school? You find ways to continue being a student. So I decided I was going to go off and do a master's, and my master's took me to Saudi Arabia. So I was located in King Abdullah University of Science and Technology in the central Saudi coast of the Red Sea. And this image is actually a real image of coral reefs in the Red Sea, super vibrant, colorful, full of life, full of fish. And an amazing thing about the Red Sea for me was that it was also very warm. So scuba diving and snorkeling was very enjoyable. So as I kind of explored this new environment and really getting used to the fact of like, wow, marine science is a real career. You can do research, people are interested, and this is something happening around the globe. My first thought about what I wanted to study was, oh, I'd like to study coral bleaching in the Red Sea. And this was 2015. My professor at the time said, oh, that doesn't happen here. The corals are pretty well adapted to very warm temperatures, very extreme environments. I mean, the Red Sea is super salty as well. So these corals have been evolving and adapting to environments that in other seas and other places would have caused coral bleaching very early on. But in 2015, coral bleaching wasn't really something that plagued the Red Sea coast. So instead of studying corals and their susceptibility to climate change, I decided to find a different creature that totally captivated my attention on my first snorkel, and that was the giant clam. So these guys also have a symbiotic relationship with algae, just like coral. They open up towards the sun to photosynthesize, and this relationship has allowed them to get so big. So it's the fact that they have this relationship that we have giant clams. My master's had really nothing to do with climate change. I was actually looking at what is the species diversity of clams in the Red Sea, because at that point in time, nobody really knew which species of giant clams lived there. So I did a lot of diving, a lot of sampling, a lot of DNA extractions and lab work to basically map out what are the different species. All throughout this time, I'm also keeping track of like what's happening on other reefs around the world, where coral bleaching in the Great Barrier Reef was now happening every year. And sea level rise was becoming an issue for coastal communities. And then still trying to convince my parents that climate change was a real thing. I think everybody in this call is probably aware of how aggravating it can be that science itself has become so politicalized and that climate change is something that someone could say they believe in or they don't, as if it's a religion, which is something that's really hard as a science communicator to get across to people that are outside of the bubble, outside of our circle, outside of our choir. Basically, how do we talk to people outside of our comfort zones who have different political ideas, different religions, different ideas about what's important to them in their life? And so I'm over here in the Red Sea studying giant clams. My parents in Arizona are very confused as to how I'm going to get a real job and get paid and live a real adult life. So, in the realm of me trying to explain my work and the importance of the ocean as a carbon sink and just what climate change is doing to our planet, all of this is kind of going over my parents' heads and maybe just something they don't want to confront. So, it was really hard for me to try to convince my parents that this is a thing. And these are just my parents. What about like other world leaders, other people who are making real decisions? If I can't start at home, what power do I have to bring this science to anybody else? So at some point, I kind of slowed down and was thinking, oh, maybe I'll just accept the fact that my parents believe a certain thing and I can't get them to come over and see what I'm seeing. Eventually, they came to see me graduate for my master's in Saudi. And at the same time of graduation, I was putting on an art exhibit around the theme of growth. And I had my parents come check it out. I really gave them no context as to what was happening in this room. This is one of the pieces that I created for it. Basically, taking skeletons of corals that my colleagues doing their marine science degrees were doing experiments on or collecting for morphology studies, and took all their leftovers that they were going to throw away anyways and hot glued them all into the shapes of human hands. So the idea was that we're thinking about corals in the realm of how they're similar to humans and how both of us as organisms are essentially growing on the bones of our ancestors, building on the past, settling into places that feel right, and then kind of dealing with the challenges that have come up in our present moment. So this is a piece that I put together. And again, didn't give my parents a whole lot of context. I let them walk around the room and see everything. And then it wasn't until maybe a month later that I had gotten back home to Arizona and I overheard a conversation my dad was having with his best friend on the phone. And I was kind of eavesdropping, he didn't know I was listening in, but basically he did the whole thing that dads do where it's like, yeah, I'm proud of my daughter for graduating, getting her degree. She's traveled, she's done all this cool stuff. But maybe the thing that I'm the most proud of is the fact that she put on this whole art exhibit. And I didn't even know she was creative in that way. I didn't even know that she had this other passion. I thought she was very into her science and, trying to explain and lecture her science to people. But then in that conversation, it was very much him telling his friend, like, that was the moment that I realized that there's something deeper happening here. And it wasn't through me trying to talk to my dad. It was me putting art on display and letting him feel whatever emotions were going to come up for him. Pivotal point in my life, realizing that art had this much power. I think it was also kind of a funny thing for a scientist to think about because scientists are really trained to not bring emotion into their work at all. We're also really trained to not tell stories about our work. You look at your results and you can state your conclusions, but you definitely stay away from any of your own personal anecdotes because that's not scientific. So the types of audiences we attract are not people that are there to feel something. They're people that are there to hear facts, but facts are not as influential as stories. So now I get to the point in my presentation where I have this map and messy notes of all my thoughts through my career. The idea of imposter syndrome being pretty common no matter what career you're in. So for all of us in this call, we've probably felt it at some point in our lives. But I think it's also that moment in time where you go through a path thinking that you're on one career trajectory. And this career trajectory for me started in 8th grade. I decided I wanted to be a marine biologist when I grew up. Okay, at some point along the lines, I thought, oh, maybe I'll be a professor. So, still kind of like moving forward into this path where grad school, degrees, academia, scientific research, that was what I was envisioning for myself. At some point along that path, I remembered I liked art. That was a fun passion side project for a bit. And then I realized that it had much more meaning to me than I gave it credit. I decided to leave academia. I decided to leave a PhD in the middle of COVID and transition into science communication, mainly to get artists and scientists talking to each other, because I knew how much power it had for my personal experience and my family's ability to see what I was studying. So I knew there was something there for other people to see. Um, but of course, having those questions come back to me, imposter syndrome showed up in a totally different way, where it was basically like, if I had grown up my whole life thinking I was going to be a marine biologist, and then I left that career, what am I supposed to be now? Like, what is my identity? So, a few identity crises later, and I realized that I was much more of an entrepreneur than I thought. So that's when I founded Emerging Creatives of Science, and now I run that as a full-time business and consulting. And it's also a community of artists and scientists that have come together. So now I'm getting to the point of sharing with you the actual substance of this workshop. This is where I go into the forms of science communication that right now what you see on the screen hopefully are pretty familiar to you. These are things that we've seen as traditional ways of communicating science. They still have a lot of power. They have different purposes and they reach different target audiences. They're all very great forms of science communication. So these are things like written press releases, spoken radio interviews or presentations, even science conferences, physical things like museum exhibits, also hands-on demonstrations. So anytime you've been in a lab or looking at, coral reef conservation on the ground in the water, that kind of stuff. Emotional things like art and music and film. I mean, how many of us saw movies where at the end of it we wanted to cry for nature because of how devastating it made us feel? Or maybe it was hopeful. Maybe we were feeling actually much more inspired to take action because of those stories. And another thing I'll say is an emotional form of science communication, which may seem a little bit morbid, but actually is a really strong one, is anytime there is like a loss or catastrophic event that happens. How many times do we see people come together when there are floods? How many times do we see people come together when there's a massive ecosystem destruction and people coming together to advocate for conserving those areas, or even just talking about those things, right? I mean, the whole fact of like the political sphere in the US created a kind of catastrophe in its own, but it also brought people together around big missions of what people wanted to accomplish now that we're moving into a very strange time in our lives. But moving on from the traditional forms of science communication, what I want to share with you in more depth is some of the new ways that we're going to make a shift in science communication. This is also a way to think about talking about science in more creative ways. So let's get outside of those like strict bubbles of press releases and radio interviews and scientific conferences and think about science communication and storytelling as something that you can integrate into your everyday lives through so many different tools. So 4 of these bullet points talk about the pillars, and then the last one is very much a mindset shift. So I'm going to dive into each of them a little bit deeper. The first one is human-centered design. So this one is very well told through a story of Oral-B toothbrushes who, this toothbrush has existed for so long. Like, it is the style and product out there that if you're going to brush your teeth manually, this is how you're going to do it. However, they gave this toothbrush to kids and watched them try to brush their teeth, and did not work, right? So basically what they had to do is completely redesign the toothbrush. They had to make a more ergonomic handle for smaller hands, shorter bristles for smaller teeth and more sensitive gums, and really thinking about their audience. So this is a story that I bring up because anytime we talk about science, even if it's not super scientific or technical, even if we just want to have a conversation with friends or family, it's super important to know your audience. So that's the first one that I bring in. And then the three components of this are actually things that we can take from product design. So if we think about having empathy with our user, it means that we're not only understanding their needs, it's that we're putting ourselves in their shoes. So if you're going to go talk about science with a class of preschoolers or kindergartners, try to put yourself back into the mindset of being a kid. If you're trying to speak to someone who actually has completely different political ideology, or someone who maybe did not have access to education in the same way that you did, try to put yourself in their shoes. What kind of information would you want to hear? And how are you going to best receive it? You can tailor your messages to your audiences. You can also use different language to talk about something. The fact that climate change is such a political and hot topic phrase right now actually could be a reason why you decide to not use that phrase at all. Can you talk about changes in the environment, changes in the weather in ways that are much more familiar to people that don't understand or typically shy away from climate change topics? So this is very much meeting your audience where they are and then using that place where they are to then elevate their scientific literacy. So it's kind of bringing them up to where you're trying to talk and educate them. And it's also a lot of listening, right? Like this is part of having that empathy. And then using creativity to solve their problems and a way to make it economical. So if we're not talking about money, it's also about attention span. What are the commodities, the resources that people have today that feel limited? And how are you going to gain a piece of those limited resources from them? It can be money, it can be attention, it can be energy, it can be time. But what are you asking of that person? The next one is really one that I enjoy talking about. It's this concept of embracing nuance. So commonly what you'll find with people that are outside of the bubble of, the ocean world or climate change or environmental kind of science world is that you can see science actually being used against us. And this is because humans want things to be beautifully categorized as true and untrue. However, in science, we know that that's not the case. We're always working on finding more evidence to support what we're understanding around us. But it is the collection of evidence to support a hypothesis. And so if we're not actually getting to proving something, we have to be really careful about talking about something as true fact. It also means that if we are encountering people that talk about science and say something like, well, I read this article, or, there was a news channel talking about science figuring out something, discovering something, and then the next day they say something completely different. That's our point as science communicators, to actually challenge what's happening, not with the stories that we're told, but more on the level of what is that person understanding to be true and where are they uncomfortable. So we're going to find that people are just generally uncomfortable if they have to sit in any point of uncertainty. So how can we get people more comfortable with being uncertain? I think it's through the way that we tell our stories. It's the way that we talk about science. And it's the way that we talk about us as scientists, if you are a scientist, right? So we're not people that are out there saying like, this is the hardcore truth. We're people that are saying like, hey, we're figuring out more things about something we didn't know about before. So how can we share that information in the lens of we're figuring out more pieces of a puzzle rather than we've built the whole puzzle, that's done, that's complete fact, and we're going to move on to the next thing. One of the cool things that I like to bring up, and I might share this with y'all later, is there is an Instagram story done by a university talking about how gooseneck barnacles at one point in time were believed to grow from trees and that they also increased in abundance whenever there were more geese around. This is a very strange like correlation of events that may have happened in certain ecosystems, and then people had linked together dots or like strung together these points of information to tell a story that's completely ridiculous. So gooseneck barnacles have nothing to do with geese, but at one point in time we thought they had a relation to how many geese were around. We were going to see more gooseneck barnacles. So at the end of this little Instagram story, the person says, "What is the gooseneck barnacle that we are holding on to today? Like, what is that piece of truth that we think we know today that we are putting out there into the world as if it's fact, that maybe 10, 20, 100 years down the line, we find out was completely debunked? Like, how can we be careful about that?" So that's embracing the nuance. The next one is super fun too, because we're in this world of AI and all this crazy new tech that's coming out. So I'm sharing this pillar because I think as communicators and really whatever profession you're in, having access to and becoming familiar with as many of this new technology tools as you can get your hands on is really important. And this is not to say you have to be pro AI. It doesn't mean that you need to incorporate these tools into your work. But I think it's really important to be familiar with them because we need to understand their capacities, their limitations, what they're good at, and also how they may be construing information. So if you're generally not interested in using AI because of, there's many reasons. Maybe it can be encouraging more misinformation. It could be not crediting proper scientists or artists in the work that it's giving people. It can still continue to hallucinate, which is basically give people wrong information. So all of these things are reasons why we might not be interested in using AI. But as it continues to progress, it's really important that we stay on top of understanding these tools and their abilities so that we now understand how people in the world receive information and how they perceive it. So if somebody receives information through AI today, are they going to be skeptical or doubtful of it versus in 10 years when AI may be super competent in its ability to give accurate information? So we need to know how people's perceptions are changing. I also think that like VR and technology have a lot of great tools and abilities to communicate our work in ways that we're not doing. They also have a lot of like data processing power. So like if we can get away from using our own time and energy on things that AI can take care of, and then look at the bigger picture and inject things that we have as humans that AI will never take, like our creativity, our ability to connect dots, our ability to make art with technology. I mean, all of these things that we do as humans, how can we leverage those skills and spend more time doing those skills and letting AI and other technologies take over some of the more mundane and data intensive heavy tasks? So that's kind of my take on the latest tech. So this last slide that's basically talking about a particular pillar in my approach to science communication is also a little tricky, right? Because I am not from an indigenous tribe. I don't represent a Native American tribe in the US. So it's really hard for me to say I can talk about this topic. So I'm going to be really sensitive about this, but also say, I'm not an expert in this. And I really would love feedback from anybody that could provide it. But what I want to share here is that this idea of traditional knowledge sharing, there's so much information that has been passed from generation to generation in Native and Indigenous tribes, but also in today's culture. So if we think about how knowledge is shared across culture, it is through your parents, it is through your upbringing, it is through things you're learning in school, it's also through the media, it's through fashion, it's through pop culture. It's through everything that you're encountering throughout the day. So this type of knowledge that gets passed down, it's not by sharing a graph or a statistics or a list of facts. It is by stories. So stories that are told verbally. Sometimes there's stories told through dance or music. Sometimes they're stories told through traditional celebrations. What do you do in your holiday celebrations that is actually tied to some deeper meaning in either religion or your family's understanding of the environment around you, right? And my family around Christmas, my family actually eats 7 different types of fish because we are Italian, and that is supposed to represent 7 different types of good luck. But something that's really interesting is that we don't have access to 7 different types of fish as easily anymore because these types of fish are potentially overfished or finding them harder to access in grocery stores because they're very expensive, or we're finding out that they're not super healthy to eat because they might be loaded with toxins because they're higher on the food chain. So, as we learn things about science and sustainability and the importance of ocean ecosystems, it can actually start to change our very traditions that we hold as part of our identity and as part of our culture. So, there's some integration of science, ocean importance, taking care of nature, taking care of our land and our environments that are a part of our culture and identity. So, the idea here is like, what are the stories that you want to tell that start to perpetuate ocean advocacy in your life so that it becomes integrated in your own identity as well as the people you care about? Maybe you have kids, family members, friends, people in your community that as you tell your story, they can actually resonate with those stories more and connect on that level. So that's the last pillar. The final slide that I want to share is actually more of a mindset shift. So this one is talking about how, academia can really do a great job of putting out individual scientists when you graduate and you're at a point where you're competing for the same funds. You're looking for tenure track professorship, you're looking for postdoc positions, whatever it is you're looking for, it feels extremely competitive out there. And that is not just the case in science, right? It's the case in industry. It's the case in, starting your own businesses. It feels like competition is always going to be there. There is a healthy level of competition if we're progressing and we're challenging each other to be better. But I think the problems in today's society, especially around ocean space and taking care of the environment, are so interdisciplinary and so intertwined with all these different professions that we have that we can no longer be competitive. We have to shift to a collaborative mindset to solve these problems. And not only by solving through collaboration with each other, but inviting different disciplines to weigh in on a problem. So, no matter what the problem is, you may be able to ask an artist, an engineer, a researcher, a project manager, somebody who is a filmmaker. Any of one of these professions may have an actual solution to your problem that you would not have gotten otherwise if you did not invite them to that conversation. So this is just highlighting how we can shift more into consortiums, networks. I mean, the ECOP program in general is already doing this really well. But how do we start bringing this mindset shift to other places in science? So I'm going to pause here because I think this is a great time for us to take a look at the poll that you would have all filled out right in the beginning of this workshop to kind of get a look at who's in the room and how can we collaborate with each other.
Well, everyone, the polls turned out really exciting. We have folks from all over the globe online with us today, and that's one form of collaboration and how we can all unite from having different ecosystems that we're studying, looking at, and seeing those connections. The other cool part is seeing how many different disciplines we have here. And before I even break that down and how many different types of researchers, scientists, explorers we have here. We have folks that are just starting a postdoc. We have students that are just getting into grad school and even an undergraduate. I'm sure there are folks that haven't said that they don't know what they're doing next, and that's exciting. But that ranges from entry-level jobs to folks that are directors and managers. We have folks in the marine social sciences, folks that are focusing on pollution, ocean literacy, educational communication. Marine heat waves was a pretty cool one that popped up. We have comic illustrators in here that focus on marine biology. We have folks that are journalists, graphic designers. this spans not just into one little section, but something that really gives us that collaboration outlook to where if you have a biologist talking over here to someone whose background is journalism, what cool can we come up with? And that's just in this webinar. So imagine if you start taking that to family. Like my background, I'm a captain, I work on ships. And I can promise you, I can pick anyone out of this group and I can find you a role in that on that boat that you would be able to excel at just because of your strengths. And now it's time for all of us to kind of collaborate and see what we can do to bring those together.
Yeah, thank you, Holly. Okay, so now we're gonna jump into like our interactive part of the workshop. After kind of hearing everything that I've shared in terms of the pillars that I use for science communication, I'm sure everybody here also has their own really cool, innovative ways of talking about science. We're gonna get into breakout rooms. So we have tons of people in our workshop today. So we're going to be creating a lot of breakout rooms, and Anna's going to help us with that. But before we jump into those, I'm going to give you a rundown of what we're doing. So we're going to have breakout rooms where you're going to introduce yourselves, talk about just very quickly what you work on. And then there's going to be a shared Google folder that I will put in the chat, or Anna will put in the chat. And that is where each group will create a Google Doc. This is for our workshop. You can access it later, but the Google Doc is going to be like where you're going to take some notes. The first thing you'll do is name your team. So come up with whatever name you'd like to. And then you're going to dive into creative ways that you can talk to non-experts about the things that you work on. So as a group in your breakout room, you're going to decide one science topic, one research question, one particular thing that you want to focus on as your like piece of content. And then think about how you can actually make that a real project using some cool creative approach. Things you're going to want to think about are, what are you trying to teach people and how do you want them to feel? So I'm really kind of diving into the emotional aspect here because of how powerful emotion is for inspiring action. And then once you come up with your project, so it could be anything from like, I want to take microbes from the ocean and create an art exhibit using microbes on agar sheets that will actually create art. That could be a really cool exhibit, right? Or you could talk about like coral anatomy and how you want to have people build their own sculptures around the inside of a polyp. Or you could talk about sea level rise and how people can actually go out and measure different water quality aspects and what that would mean if the ocean started rising in their community. So think about different ways that you'd want to bring your topic to non-experts, and then you'll nominate one person from your group to be the person to potentially pitch it. At the end, we're going to have about a 20-minute session. At the end, we're going to ask a few groups to pitch. I and Holly will stay on as long as we need to. We have another half hour of our time dedicated to this. So for anybody else who needs to leave at the hour, they can go. But if you'd like to stay on and continue hearing pitches or have conversation, please stay on. We'll be on for another half hour. So I am going to stop the sharing, and Anna's going to get us set up for breakout rooms.
Yeah.
And give you guys a moment to get settled into your rooms.
Yes, and thank you again, Melissa, for your wonderful presentation, and for Holly showing us how diverse we are all, coming from so many backgrounds here. So in the Zoom chat, you will see that I put a message towards the Google Drive folder that you can use, and then I will create some breakout rooms. Don't worry if you haven't opened the folder yet. I will make sure that every breakout room receives this message again. And good luck.
Because we do want to. So right now, like Anna said, if you have general questions about the workshop or things that you might want to connect with me later on, put all of that in the chat. And then to kind of kick us off for this next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to hand it over to the breakout room that I was in, because we're going to pitch our idea first, give you an idea of what we talked about. That'll also set up other groups to share their ideas. So over to Raman.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Raman, and I'm going to be presenting the idea that we talked about in the group. And I am currently doing an internship in a marine protected area, and that is where this thought sprung up from, which was MPS for everyone. So a marine protected area it's like a very particular term used in science, and we wanted to know how to communicate that to people who do not live near a coast, who do not understand why would you need a protection, what would that look like, and what decisions lead to an area being marked as a marine protected area, and all the nuances that come with it. And for people who live inside the continent in cities, we were trying to see what kind of terms would be appropriate for them to get an idea. And we talked about marine parks or ocean sanctuaries. And we still felt that there was a little bit of a need to show interactiveness of how like decisions lead to this, and to show a visual understanding of what a marine protected area looks like. Because if you don't live near a coast, it's very hard to visualize the ecosystem there and how it is being protected and what those protection measures entail. So to get all of this going about, we tossed a few ideas, maybe VR, maybe like a slideshow of how things progress over time, and we landed with an idea of like making an interactive game. So you might have come across some of these games where like there's a storyline and you have to choose a certain option, and as you keep choosing, the story gets branches and you lead to different scenarios and different outcomes. So that is where the idea began, and I'm going to hand it over to Natalie, and she's going to explain what this game would actually look like.
Yeah, so this game is gonna take you, basically you would decide between you'll have like two decisions. For example, in order to like protect this area, one of them could be like, oh, we allow in like skis and boats to like be over this area. You click yes, okay. You increase tourism, but now there's a decrease in like some species of fish or some sort. So it'll be like real life scenarios, but like you have the option to press like yes or no. And then in the end, it kind of concludes like, okay, this will be considered a marine protected area. It's like, oh, not quite. And it will be just like a fun way for people to like walk through or like see the different things that goes into like for something to be a marine protected area, because it also takes time for an area to be like for a marine protected area to be fully developed and fully flourish. And in the game too, it could be also included like different organizations like that are involved in this one particular area. So if people want more information about it, they have somewhere to click or like search up to. And yeah, that's what we came up with like in this gamify situation.
Was there anyone else from our breakout room that wanted to add to that? Otherwise, we may hand it over to another room to share their idea. So Holly, who else you think is ready to share something that they talked about?
Yeah, so room 5, you're gonna jump up next, and then after them will be room 1. Okay, and then you're in the batter's box, ready to go.
Do we still have folks from room 5 here? And
I'm
if
still
anybody
here.
feels comfortable, hi.
Hi.
Do you want to share some of your ideas of what you guys talked about? No
I
matter
can
how
go
far
through
along they
it.
got.
Yeah, I'm not sure who all is still here, but I can go through and do it.
Yeah.
So everybody in our group, we all kind of have different areas of expertise. Some of us, like one of our group members, she's doing a podcast that's focusing on art and how that relates to the ocean. Most of my experience has been in teaching.
We've got a doctoral student who's looking at ocean governance and how to include traditional ecological knowledge into how we create laws. We had a group member who is doing ocean literacy and RV and AR for that. So we were kind of trying to figure out how to combine all of those ideas together. And we also have another group member who's doing cold water photography and diving. So we ultimately ended up deciding that we wanted to do kind of like a website where we were combining all four of those different forms of science communication, where you have the written, the spoken, the physical, and you have the emotional. So on our website, most of it would be focusing on photography and education, how we can take traditional ecological knowledge to inform governmental laws surrounding ocean protections. And then additionally, we came up with this idea of having a comedy skit series, kind of in like an SNL style, where every week we would release a new video focusing on a different ocean sector, from cold water diving to the industrial fishing market to overfishing, that kind of stuff. And it was really cool being able to combine all of our different ideas and areas of expertise to sort of come up with this idea. Thank you so much for that opportunity.
Oh, that's lovely. I love the comedy skit. I mean, it's great how we can use laughter as a way to like get people to break down barriers, because once you start laughing with a crowd, you feel connected with them and you don't even need to know anything about them. So like I think that is such a good use of emotion to get action. So thanks. Awesome. And who's the next group coming up, Holly?
The next group is 1, if anyone from room 1 is still here. And then after that will be group 2.
I can talk for group 1. 1 second, let me just turn my camera on. So we didn't get too far into our project development. We kind of just introduced ourselves, and we all, again, kind of have very different backgrounds. So I'm specializing in marine biology and marine conservation, and then another team member was looking into like art and how they do scientific storytelling through art. And then another one was graphic design and intertwining that with environmental communication. So we kind of just had discussions about how art has kind of inspired science along the way, and that could be a specific project idea. So we talked about back when, for example, when Charles Darwin was on his journeys of discovering species, that started with art when he was drawing the species that he saw, and that was like now that's like a scientific kind of record that people use. And also just talking about things like how with star constellations, that's how sailors back in the day were navigating journeys through seas and stuff. So I guess our project would be something along the lines of incorporating that art and how it's inspired our science and storytelling. And I think it's Marine in our group. She was talking about the importance of like highlighting the risks of what a non-functioning ocean would be like, because that kind of directly relates to our survival. So for example, highlighting how having no oxygen in the ocean, how would that impact not only ocean life but humans as well. And we had some discussions about doing that through storytelling, through art. Yeah, that's basically it.
That's awesome. Does anybody else from that group want to share anything? I feel like that was a really insightful thing to say, that you're actually looking at it through the lens of art inspiring science, because I think right now a lot of people are more aware of science inspiring art. But if you look through time, like it has always been art and this interest of trying to describe the world around us through sketching, through art, through different forms of expression, even through like dance and song, that have actually inspired the further exploration that has led to science. So I think like pulling that through as a way of like reminding people that art has always been with us. And it's been something that's so deeply rooted in like human biology, even that like if we take that forward as the lens we can look at science, it actually helps people shift their perspective a little bit. So I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And don't worry, we still use constellations for navigation. There's still exams you have to pass for that. So I'm so happy you mentioned that. So next up is going to be room 2, and then after that will be room 3. So is anyone from 2 still here? Anyone? 2 going once, going twice. All right, we'll come back at the end if anyone's still here. Let's jump into room 3.
Okay, I can kick it off for our room. I think there's a couple of us still here. I'm Chloe, by the way. Nice to meet you all. This was a really great workshop. Thank you so much, Melissa and Holly. But our room had a very diverse group of individuals with marine science backgrounds, physical oceanography, and more social science, which was myself. So we kind of tried to tie in the physical oceanography with an issue that we all think is really important, which is marine plastic pollution. So we called our project One Ocean, One Crisis, how plastic connects us all. And we came up with a few different ideas, but one to highlight is creating an interactive virtual map where folks can track how plastic pollution travels throughout the ocean, but have it more of like a storytelling, have a storytelling component in there. So Angeline from my room had mentioned like the rubber duck spill of 1992, and maybe we can tie in like using rubber ducks as like the character that can bring users throughout the map and kind of tell them the story of how plastic pollution travels throughout our ocean and how we're all connected in our one shared water system. So we kind of like tried to tie that in. And I know Angeline has done comics in the past. So we were maybe talking about integrating that in some way. And I think that'd be great to tie into the map. But also highlighting along the way, not just like the ecological impacts. We talked about a lot of threats plastic pollution causes to ecosystem health, but also the impact that it has on individuals in coastal and island communities. Impacts on underwater cultural heritage are all really important things to highlight. So some of those social impacts of plastics. But we really wanted folks to feel more empowered to engage in citizen science data collection and contribute to increasing corporate responsibility. So addressing the root cause of the problem of plastic pollution, which is plastic production, and having individuals understand that, you know, it's not the individuals to blame for the plastics crisis. It's a systemic issue that starts at the source. So kind of tying it into this bigger issue that is very relevant now with the UN Plastics Treaty. But through this like interactive fun way that folks can kind of learn how plastic pollution maybe ends up in their community or where plastic from their community ends up later. So those were some of our initial ideas, but I can also pass it to Samaya and Angeline from room 3 as well to share.
I think another a good point that Chloe also makes is the ocean literacy element here, that we're really, you know, going on the one ocean idea, which is that it's not just about the one ecosystem that you're living or the one region. It's always the potential risk. For example, we know that one piece of plastic coming from one ocean region could end up on a coral reef in a different ocean region. We know that could cause disease outbreaks in coral reefs. It can cause issues for fish that are consuming that plastic. So I think the key element here is to also get people into that idea that it's the connectivity between the different ocean systems, between the different ecosystems. And I think that's also tying into the, you know, what we're trying to teach people here. It's the threats of plastic ocean, but also about, you know, learning the connectivity. It's of course, you know, on a community level, it's very important to understand how the individual basis affects each of the oceans. But I think it's also about understanding, all right, who takes responsibility here? It's not just about me, it's about, you know, it's about the community, it's about the bigger guys that are maybe doing some of the pollution here. It's about tying all that in. Well, definitely also that point about underwater cultural heritage. I like that. That's a good point to add there.
I love that. Yeah, I think it's a great way for you guys to frame the problem around, like, you first use plastic pollution, which is very visible and accessible to people that are not in ocean science, right? Like anybody can see trash on the beach and know that's an issue. But then you take them through the journey of where that plastic is going, and then you tell them about other issues that it is connected to along the way. And like without that first starting point, even though it's plastic, kind of this common enemy that we all have, it's like the most accessible challenge that anyone can understand. So you're not trying to work on convincing them of this problem. You're actually just going to integrate different points along the path to say, like, hey, did you know how it affects this? Did you know how it affects this? And that creates like a beautiful kind of form of literacy and like a sustainable approach of like creating new advocates too. So awesome project idea. I love that. Who's up next, Holly?
Room number 4. Do we have anyone still here from room number 4? Throwing it out.
Well, I can go, but I can't remember which group I was in actually. But I was with Olukele and Eduardo, and well, we all come from different backgrounds, and we decided to talk about the importance of seagrass, how to get non-expert to care about seagrass. And we decided that it's a good idea to connect this information to what people already value. For example, show how seagrass meadows support fisheries and livelihoods, for example, and also explain them that seagrass trap carbon, which help fighting climate change, for example, and also using art or storytelling. We could organize a community mural, for example, or even sand art about underwater meadows, and also tell stories of a single blade of seagrass, for example, a dugong or sea turtle, of a fisherman, for example. So we can tell stories, relate seagrass with fishermen, dugongs, and sea turtles, and also interactive media. We can use interactive media such as clips, like time lapse, for example, of meadows swaying and wildlife they shelter, for example, and also with questions like, did you know, like infographics of we can tell them, did you know, for example, that seagrass cover less than 1% of ocean, but they support 20% of fish, for example. So also talking with shop owners in coastal areas, so that they can also talk with tourists, local communities about the importance of seagrass. So these are the items that we thought that would be helpful to introduce this topic to non-experts.
That's awesome. Thank you, Manuela. I think like the common theme that I'm hearing about a lot of these ideas is that you find one point that somebody can enter into the space, like what's your entry point? And then you take them through the cycle of how it all connects through that ecosystem or that problem, or how seagrass affects not only marine animals but also fishermen and people. So it's like connecting the environment but using one point to get a non-expert introduced. And I think that's a really strong strategy for any form of science communication. So very well done. Holly, do we have any other groups, or should we kind of wrap it up and kind of share next steps and resources?
Yeah, I know that there was one more group that didn't present. So if anyone was in a group and they didn't see someone in their group talking, does anyone want to chime in?
Hi guys, I'm just gonna give a quick heads up that in 5 minutes the meeting might cut off, so we should make it a quick one.
Sounds good. We got speed round for any group that hasn't presented. Otherwise, if you want to just share comments in the chat, that's awesome. What I'm going to put in the chat for right now is just a survey link that will help me make this workshop better. So I would really appreciate your feedback. It shouldn't take too long. Very simple. It's also in that shared Google folder, so you can find it again if you exit out of the Zoom and you want to find that link again. I also am really open to you guys like reaching out and connecting. So while I am designing this workshop through ECOS, I also work with the UN Ocean Decade, putting on a Gen Ocean campaign. So Chloe and I have worked on that together, and have found many other people that are working on citizen science and also youth components in any sort of ocean science work. So if you guys want to connect with me for anything in that realm, let me know. And hopefully I'll kind of find you all too on like LinkedIn and other ways we can connect. So any other last questions or comments, or if that one final group wants to do their speed round presentation?
I see Eduardo raising a finger.
Eduardo, go ahead.
I don't know if it's possible to answer my question that I put on chat.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to come with. Was that about, so there's one question, Melissa, in the mindset of getting comfortable with the uncomfortable, how valuable would it be to share stories of failure or difficulties in our storytelling? I love this question.
Such a good question. I don't think we should shy away from letting people know when we fail, or even when we make mistakes, right? I think like as scientists, if you are coming from a science background, and generally in any profession, we are trying to prove ourselves all the time. And it's really scary to admit when we're wrong or we made a mistake. Although I think in this form of science communication that we're trying to shift towards, where we're making things more relatable to people, if we can showcase that scientists are also human, then I think that also allows people to perceive the information we share as something that's ever evolving. There's obviously like boundaries and limitations around where you want to talk about failures, but I think if you do it tastefully, it can be really a powerful tool to get people to trust you. I don't know if anybody else has other comments on that. That's a great question.
Yeah, one of my favorite things I like to view this with is the human aspect. Like, you are a human. Just because your title says you're one thing, that doesn't mean that you know every single thing about it. That's the beauty of collaboration and community here. So I find a lot of power in the phrase, I don't know, but let's figure it out. Like, showing that it's not just me who is going to figure this out, but you are a part of us figuring this out and finding the answer. So use power in saying, I don't know, because you don't need to know everything. That is completely unreachable as a human.
Yeah, I completely stand by that. Wow. Yeah, thank you so much, Holly and Melissa, for today's workshop. I think we all learned so much. And thank you also to all the people who were joining today. You were also interactive, and it was great to hear all of these ideas. Then I put in the chat the link to our LinkedIn account. Go ahead and follow to stay tuned of future webinars and other events. And we have a next webinar on Friday, the 25th of July, relating to the project on seagrass meadows. This webinar will be on restoring blue carbon ecosystems. So thank you all so much. And Melissa and Holly, if there's still something you want to share or say with the audience, then go ahead. We have 1 more minute.
I think I'm good. I think I look forward to connecting with you guys. Find me on LinkedIn or get my email. I think I'll be able to connect with Anna to see who has registered for this event and be able to share my contact with you all.
Yep, for sure.
Excited to keep collaborating. Thanks for everyone for coming.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
everyone.
Thank you all today.